There we go. Yeah, and I was just gonna say, they're 2 to 4 weeks. They're starting to open us up. I don't know if they want to or not, but I think it's just because they don't have a choice because people are losing their damn minds. Hey, everybody, welcome to Red Morning. What's up, YouTube? I think that's how I'm supposed to do it. So with us today, if you guys don't know, this is Nick August. I guess I want to call you publisher of Punch Riot Magazine.
Yep.
And actually, you know what? Why don't you do the spiel? Because you're going to get it way better than me stammering my way through it.
The spiel about who I am and what I do?
Yeah, some people in the chat might not know who you are, heaven forbid.
Probably. I'm mainly a smart-ass, professional smart-ass. But yeah, I just started publishing a magazine called Punch Riot. You can see that at punchriot.com. And I write, I edit, I do various kinds of web consulting and technology consulting because that's been my main gig for the last 20 years, although I'm looking to move away from that a little bit and hopefully get more back into writing, editing, publishing in some capacity.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to start it off anyway. I was thinking, so when I first got to the Red Pill, there was like a very small disclaimer, like on the subreddit, on what the purpose of the place was. And sexual strategy was the first part, and then positive male identity was the other part. And I thought, what an interesting way, like creativity is essentially one of the ways that men have been kind of left behind. Like we don't have, why do I never remember the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? That guy, the reporter.
Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah, we don't have like our Hunter S. Thompsons anymore. Most people who are writing are either writing about Harry Potter or vampires. And who's the most masculine writer I can think of right now who's like mainstream? And that's the Game of Thrones guy, that George R.R. Martin.
Sure.
Who's essentially Jabba the Hutt. Is whatever.
I can see that.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, so for a lot of guys here, I mean, there's some guys here that are young, teenagers, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, all the way up to 60. Some guys kind of remember what it's like to have like positive male influence in just creative culture. And some people don't know it at all. And I just thought it would be really great to have you on so we can kind of talk about what it used to be back when guys had things other than truck nuts and basketball games, you know?
I'm definitely your guy because I've been around a while.
Well, yeah, you taught me, what was the one? How I was always worried, like everybody complains that Rational Male, like Rollo's first book, was essentially all of his blog posts, and he kind of collected them together and put them into a narrative format. People were like, oh, this is lazy. He's just taking his blog and putting a price tag on it. And then you were letting me know that that's pretty much how writing has been for like the last hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, at least going back to the 19th century, there are a lot of famous novels, and I believe Moby Dick was one, that were published serially in magazines. That's mainly how people interacted with writing back in the day, was through magazines. And so a lot of things like Moby Dick were serially published in magazines, and then after the publication run was through, after they got through the end, then they would wrap it all up in a book and sell it again. So it was kind of, the thing that people don't realize is that writers aren't people who are, well, some of them probably are, but they're not sitting down thinking, okay, I'm writing the next Holy Bible or anything. They're really looking for, you know, making as much money as they can by doing as little work as possible. And the serial publication of fiction anyway was one way to accomplish that, because they could, you know, they get paid by the magazine for each chapter submission or however they broke it up. And then once that was finished, they could sell the rights to a publisher who would pay them to publish it essentially again in book form, and that's another payday. So I really think back in the day, writers and publishers were just looking for as many ways as possible to make as much money as possible off of whatever work they did.
Oh, that's interesting. Dude, that reminds me of the art world. I don't know if you know much about that space, but if you don't know, like my first degree was in art history and graphic design. And so everybody thinks art is all like about your feelings and this feminized crap. But back in the day, it was literally trade craft. There was like stone cutters, painters, carpenters. Right. Yeah. And it was the same thing. You would, at worst, a guy would get a wealthy benefactor who would pay for him, and then he could do his own little pet projects. But for the most part, these guys Like Rembrandt ran a studio, and depending on how much you paid him, if you paid him enough, he would do the whole painting. But mostly he would get like his students to do the background, and you would pay him a smaller amount, and he would just do the hands and just do the face for some reason.
That's well, I mean, even into the 20th century, you know, especially speaking about sort of a masculine aesthetic, you know, back in the day when Playboy was a different kind of magazine and they published fiction by a lot of really good writers and a lot of short story collections by at least some male writers that I'm familiar with. A lot of their stories originally appeared in magazines like Playboy and Esquire and things that were geared at a more classic male audience, and that's always been a thing. And you're right, it is, you know, with the publishing world, particularly in the northeastern United States, being overrun by academics and feminists, you know, over the last several decades, that's changed a lot. But you're right. I think there is a need to bring a lot of that back.
Well, that's what I was wondering, is like, what happened to it? Because I know the internet was part of it. A lot of the publishing, newspapers, magazines, the internet kind of killed their business model. But apparently both those groups love vampires. And I'm just wondering how we got left behind.
You know, it goes back to, I mean, there are a couple of points about the publishing world that have always been true. One of them is that it's, especially since at least the 60s, it's gradually been overtaken by academics who are usually leftists anyway, and have, you know, some kind of, if they're not outright Marxists, they have strong left-leaning politics, and usually that dovetails with some kind of feminist outlook as well. And then you've always had the publishing world in the northeastern US acting as sort of the gatekeeper for what is good writing or what is good literature and what is not. And it's been a struggle for a lot of writers who have written good books we're never going to know about because they died in the 80s and they never got published. And there wasn't the same democratized, if you want to use that word, platform like the internet and Amazon and social media now, where you can self-publish something and actually have an opportunity to distribute it to a national or worldwide audience. Whereas back in the 80s, I knew some self-published writers, and what they would do is they would have to spend the money to print up, you know, a run of 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 copies of their book, and then they'd throw it into their trunk, and they would just drive from city to city, going to bookstores and libraries and wherever they could to try and, you know, sell books out of their trunk and get people to notice it so that it would get popular enough that a publisher would pick it up.
It's like a band selling merch, except for no concert. Oh, did we lose you there?
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
But yeah, that's funny. And because I got to thank, I know we were talking about this before, Delicious Tacos. If you guys haven't read it, he's got an awesome book. Actually, that's embarrassing. I was going to go get his signed book he had given me, which was awesome. Finally, some good news. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Luckily for him, he managed to draw. And I think that's like the perfect signature I've ever seen on stuff. But he actually got me reading fiction again. And then I kind of found you and MT White. And then all of a sudden, I realized there's this entire ecosystem of like small but good writers. And they're kind of like, I don't want to go so far as to say they're in the manosphere or anything stupid like that, but they're kind of geared towards a male audience.
I just got on Twitter around this time last year. I'd been on years ago as part of my, you know, when I was more ingrained in the tech world. But as far as having a personal account, this was really the first time I really got on and did anything with it. And the main reason I got on initially was because I wanted to follow Black Label Logic, because I used to catch him on your shows, you know, the original Redman Group lineup and stuff like that. And he just
back when they were still day drinking.
Well, I got on because I wanted to, I thought he was hilarious, so I wanted to, see a little bit more. And as as you and I think talked once that I've been edged out of the company that I worked at for about 10 years and helped start. And I saw that coming, and I'm kind of burned out on technology as a full-time career. And I wanted to get more back into writing and publishing and editing and that kind of thing. And so I got on Twitter, started following him, and I followed the rest of you guys. And somehow I stumbled across Barry Nishizawa and MT White. And I had started writing some stuff. I saw that Barry had. Eventually, I discovered MT. And I had this, I was already frustrated that there wasn't a magazine or any place I could go online that really had the kind of writing that I liked and that I wanted to read. And I started seeing all this really short kind of microfiction that was really good, that I thought was really, really good. And the idea just sort of started percolating, and I was like, man, why isn't there any place out there I can just go find the stuff I want to read? And then, that voice in the back of my head said, well, dumbass, go and, do it yourself. Why are you sitting around complaining? So I said, yeah, I think I will. And so that's what led to Punch Riot. And I wanted some place where there was a more masculine aesthetic, where good fiction and good commentary and, just generally good writing could find an outlet in a way that it wasn't across the board, because there are so many, like we mentioned, there's so many more leftist academic viewpoints in publishing that, that side's taken care of. There are plenty of places people can go to publish and to read stuff along that vein, but there isn't that much that's really quality or attempting to be quality in the way that I envision it, that is doing that with a more masculine, classically masculine aesthetic. So that's what I wanted to do with Punch Riot.
Dude, that makes sense. And I like it too, because I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, Vox Day.
Yeah.
So, he started his publishing thing, Castelia House, and he treats it as like a right-wing publishing house. And my problem with it, like, obviously I'm not an American conservative, so clearly the politics side of it doesn't really interest me. But from the writing side of it, and this is the part that really gets me, there seems to be this weird esoteric pagan push in writing. Now, there's good ones. There's like Bronze Age Pervert with his book, but then there's bad ones. And I don't mean to call them out, but I've read like the first chapter of Roman's book there. I can't remember what it's called again. Damn it, I have to look it up. But it just sounds like, I don't know, it's like guys want to complain, but they want to make it sound noble. And I didn't really enjoy that writing, because I found it's just curmudgeon-y. It's get off my lawn. And I don't want to read 300 pages of that. At the same time, I don't want to read about, truck nut masculinity, where everything has to smell like leather and men are in the woods hunting boars with steak knives.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's similar to my thinking on it, because I see a lot of books out there that seem to be mainly written to push an ideology that, it's kind of like Atlas Shrugged all over again. And while I'm, I tend to identify as sort of a right libertarian, and so I have no problem with, say, the politics and the point of something like Atlas Shrugged, but it's just a horrible novel to read, and this is just almost unreadable. And for ideology, there are better ways to discuss and to communicate ideology than fiction. Fiction is supposed to, focus more on human behavior and the realities of human behavior and human interaction in some kind of with some kind of an aesthetic. And to be more indirect, but in a way that is interesting and entertaining. And so for me, the purposes of writing about ideology and then writing fiction are at a crossroads, and they're not really heading in the same direction. So I don't really like ideological fiction either. but I do like traditional masculinity in writing, like, you know, stuff you get from Hemingway. You read the classics like like Homer, and epic poetry from classical Greece and Rome.
And I'll
And
dick right Twain on this one too.
yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of been this, you know, there's almost the same kind of shaming on that kind of, you know, if you're reading Dead White Males, then, you know, there's this whole litany of things that's supposed to say about you. But, you know, if you're a typical guy, if you have some sort of classic understanding of who you are as a man and you enjoy that, then you need a place where you can get that, and you need more than just the sort of prescriptive or self-help side of it, which is important. But again,
it's kind of feminized too, though.
Say what?
That's kind of feminized too, though. That's the problem. Like Athol K, he's one of those ones, like you said, prescriptive self-help. His first book was the Male Action Plan, and then his wife started to become part of the business, and then it turned into the Mindful Action Plan, and then the Mindful Attraction Plan. It slowly just like removed every part of it that even had to do with masculinity, like being a man, taking action, solving a problem. Like all of that was just stripped away. So even self-help, I would argue, is just not there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that when you're, you know, if you take like the classic red pill experience, and, you know, they're only, you know, once you sort of flip that switch and you red pill yourself, however you want to describe it, you need more than just rereading The Rational Male over and over again. And I mean, I think Rational Male is a great book. I think your book's a great book. There are a lot of great books out there that I think dudes really do need to read, but you also need to have a place to go to supplement that with something more. And that's one of the reasons why I've buddied up with the Masculine Geek guys a lot, because I really liked what they were doing. And part of the reason I got Punch Riot going was to sort of help balance out that side of things, so that you have the prescriptive side of red pill, manosphere, whatever you want to call it these days, writing. I don't know what you call it anymore. And then, but then you also have
a pile of crap, trash fire.
But then you also have the aesthetic side of it as well, where, you know, I like the idea of being able to, you know, every time I finish putting an issue of Punch Riot together, I print it out, I sit here in my chair and, you know, pour myself a bourbon, and I sit there and read it, you know, from beginning to end, just to see what the experience is like, because that's the kind of experience that I want for myself. And I figured there were other dudes out there that wanted some of that too.
Oh, 100%. Like I said, it took me till 35 to start reading fiction, but I've gotten hooked on it. I guess One Man's Way, thanks for the $5 super chat. According to him, Anne Rand said she wrote Atlas Shrugged to describe her perfect man. If I remember correctly too, so I've never read the book, but I have heard her like biography, and apparently her life it's the kind of thing that Rollo would have like a 2-hour podcast to describe. Right. Not pretty much as like any other typical Karen. The only difference was she was Russian and looked like she got smashed in the face with the ugly shovel.
Yeah, and she was, you know, she dated younger dudes.
And a cougar.
That's right, a philosophical cougar.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So you're talking about the aesthetic, or guys like enjoying art for the sake of it, possibly learning something, and I can go into that later. But here's the thing I found is curious. Guys are starting to do that now, and there seems to be two different branches. There's the guys who love Evola and that shamanistic side of things, and then there's the guys that start to like Hemingway or that kind of side of things. And I don't know much. Like I've made it a point never to read Evola, because the people that have suggested I read it absolutely drive me nuts, and I'm like, I don't want to catch whatever they got. Yeah. But have you read any, like, because I know he's an Italian right-wing writer from the 1930s and 40s, which kind of tells you what you're looking for, what you're looking into there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who like Evola don't really understand what right-wing Italy was like in the 30s. But, you know, honestly, until I got on Twitter, and I think the first person I heard talk about Evola was you. I didn't know who it was. And I have my undergraduate degree is in philosophy and religion, and I did get a master's in English for some reason during my misguided 20s, and I'd never heard of him before. So that whole, the whole mystical, spiritual side of everything, I think is mostly,
snake oil.
Yeah, I mean,
actually, I call it pigeon dancing. Technically, I don't know if you know that one. Where
I call it bullshit, but
yeah, well, same thing. They had pigeons in a humanist experiment. It was a B.F. Skinner one where the food would be dispensed to them at random intervals, and then they noticed pigeons started developing these weird dances that they assumed would give them food.
Right.
Because they would just and it was just random, but if they did something and it got them food, they reinforced that behavior, and if it didn't, they stopped it. So they had these stupid parallel dances, and none of them worked. And so I found a lot of that stuff really works just like that.
Well, yeah, I think so too. And the reason that I was drawn more toward Rollo's work and yours and some of those other guys that you're associated with was the pragmatic aspect of it, because there's a lot out there where there was some good information on, there's some good stuff on game and managing relationships and things like that. But then it seems to have this rider or this, this extra clause on there where you're supposed to buy into either some form of Christianity or some form of that bullshit, chakra, crystals, vibrations, energy nonsense.
Oh.
And I think that, part of me hates to come down so hard on it, but I think that most of that, if not all of that, takes place in our imaginations anyway. It doesn't have any objective component to it. I can't prove that, and I could be 100% wrong, but there's just nothing about that seems practical, pragmatic, or useful to me. So I bought into some of that when I was younger, but I left that behind. So
everybody did. I read Noam Chomsky when I was younger. We all have our crosses to bear.
I did too. Yeah.
Yeah, that it drives me nuts because it kind of reminds me of yoga. Actually, what it reminds me of is Maxim magazines. I was thinking about this, like all these guys that do the shamanist thing, the pagan thing. I consider Christianity to be the Penthouse magazine. It's wrapped in a plastic case, and you have to go up to the till and you have to grab it, and it's embarrassing because everybody can see it. Back when you used to buy porn magazines, but then Maxim, it was like it's not quite porn. It's close, but there's no nipples, and you don't have to have the cover, and everybody can buy it because they like Monster Energy drink. And you know what I mean? It's just that not willing to commit to believing in the supernatural.
Right.
So no, it's not the supernatural. It's MBTI. There's a scientific method behind it. I'm like, is there really, or is there an online test that you take?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I hate that disingenuousness of it.
Well, it's, I've read some things in the, pile of shit, the manosphere, whatever you want to call it. And I see there is a mystical side of things. One of them is almost reasonable. And I've seen some things where guys, spend a lot of time out in the woods and all this other stuff. But I grew up in the woods, grew up with my kids in the woods, we go hunting and camping and fishing and did all that, typical guy shit. And
no magic.
there's no magic. And the guys who are trying to sell all that as being some sort of, jumping off point for a grand mystical experience bother me, because there is, it's almost like they're a tourist in the woods and they're romanticizing it when really there's nothing there to romanticize. And if they had to live in the woods, they would definitely change their mind about it. And, people can be romantic about going hiking because, they know in 2 or 3 days they're going to hike back out and, go to a Marriott and sit in the hot tub and all that. And so I just don't see, and I've spent a lot of time in the woods, mainly hunting and, sitting in a deer stand for hours every day. And it's beautiful. It's a great place to be. It's peaceful. It's one of the places.
It's a wonderful place to visit.
I really enjoy being there, but there's no magic. And,
well, I was,
I think thing. That magic.
The magic. Oh, I think we lost him. Damn it. I was just going to say, because I don't know if you know this, I was raised on a ranch. 300 head of cattle, 1,000 acres. It wasn't a huge ranch, but it was a ranch. And every summer when we had to do like branding or chase the cows up or down the mountain, we'd always hire a bunch of people that came in from the city because they wanted to play ranch or thinking that they're one with you. And it was, dude, not only were they incompetent, it was actually hilarious to watch how they're like, I love this stuff. I'm like, I smell like cow shit and I've been up since 4 a.m. Screw you. I didn't get to wander in on my Honda Civic.
Yeah. It's that same kind of thing. And it's the whole magic woo-woo side of it really does not interest me. And I think any dude who's into that too much is still sort of a victim of, the feminized culture that they were raised in. And I know that, that's kind of insulting to some people, but I think it's, for me, that's all that I've ever seen. And I've been around, I'm mid-50s. I've tried a lot of shit. I've done a lot of shit. I've talked to a lot of people who've tried and done a lot of shit. And, just based on my experience, my observations, it's a distraction more than a help.
100%. All right. Quickly put a pause on this one. I'm going to been sitting on this a while. Thanks, Ben, for the $5 super chat. You want advice on starting a new Red Pill YouTube channel geared towards younger men? I'm 27, been a fan of yours in Tomasi about 5 years. Well, thank you. I've been around too, but the easy answer is you have to get started and then learn as you go. The big thing I noticed, and Nick was talking about the woo-woo magic guys. So when I first started doing this online, there was a group called Upstream Twitter, and they were essentially saying, Rollo's a dick and we're better. And I was like, okay, so what do they got? And then there was no writing, there was no content, there was no nothing, basically. It was just a lot of bravado seeking on Twitter, which doesn't really count for much. He doesn't understand the spirituality. If you don't understand this, it's gone. They had a vision of what they could implement in their head. And then they had, on the other side, it's what your skill would allow you to actually deliver. And those two don't meet. This was my advice I got when I was first starting the book. The two will never meet. So most guys, what they do is because everything they do isn't good enough to implement their vision perfectly. They just don't start because it's not good enough. So they have to keep practicing or pretending or thinking it through. And then you realize after a year, you're no different than where you started. I remember even asking this guy, same thing. So for your channel, realize what you're first going to do is a pile of crap and nobody's going to like it and you're not going to like it and it's going to look like trash. But then after about 100 of them, they're going to start to look a little bit better. They're still never going to be what you vision. I've never heard of anybody fully implement their vision 100% on anything. And Nick, you can vouch for me. If you heard anybody who said any different, then they managed to hit their pinnacle. I never have.
Well, I think I look at it, I come for the last 10 to 15 years, most of my tech work has been working with startups, and usually as some kind of founding employee, and in the last 10, 12 years been more in the leadership end. And the sort of the rule of thumb in the startup world, especially if you're launching some sort of web-based application, something that's tech, is that you launch your company with software that's barely releasable. And the idea is that you want to get it out there as quickly as possible, because all of and I can confirm this having been there, because all of the shit that you talk about amongst the 3 or 4 founders of the company or the original hire group from the company in an office for 6 months before you implement something, most of that stuff ends up getting stripped out the first month or 2 that you actually go live. Really? And so the idea, especially since things are web-based now and you can make changes very quickly, is that you do what you can to keep the cost of change low, which is one of the lean startup principles. And there's a book out there called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, or Rice, R-I-E-S, which is basically what I used and followed in my career so far. That's not, some people follow it like it's the Bible. It's not, but it's got a lot of pragmatic advice in there about getting a minimum viable product launched, and then letting the experience of observing your customers or clients or end users, see how they use it, see what they're looking for, see what their main problems are, and then start implementing your feature set driven by actual user experience rather than a bunch of geniuses sitting around an office talking about what the ideal app is supposed to be.
I'm not going to lie. I don't hear the word hustle in there anywhere. So I don't know if I could buy that. What about the hustle, man? Just got to hustle. Work 16-hour days. Eat ramen. If you can't eat ramen and start a project, what's the point?
Well, you know, I've worked 16-hour days. It's not all it's cracked up to be.
Oh, I hate them.
You do have to do some of that, but the other part of it is that there's at the end of the day, and I hear this talked about a lot, and I agree with it, which is, just start as sort of a heuristic, because most people's main problem, if they have one, is they just are unwilling to start because they're perfectionists, or they think they have to have everything taken care of and perfect at the time they launch. And so just starting is good advice, but it also has to be guided by, what we call feedback loops, which you never implement a feature or a new product without also implementing mechanisms or algorithms or ways to measure that, and also to define what you think success is based on, what you want for user adoption and all that kind of stuff. So, you always have to be thinking it through and making intelligent decisions, because if you go back to the lean startup idea, and I think this applies to a YouTube channel just as much as somebody launching a multi-million-dollar company, is that you want the product decisions you make to be driven by real world need and real world usage, and not just what you think is a great idea. And one of the other principles of lean startup is pivot or persevere. So you get to these points where you say, okay, I thought things were going to go this way. I thought people were going to like my channel because of all the advice I give men, but actually I get more positive feedback on my humor. So maybe I should, morph this into more of a humor channel than just, a men's help channel. And so you get to that point where you pivot or persevere based on what the actual real world usage and need and opportunity is. And that, by keeping the cost of change low and by not over investing up front, it gives you the flexibility to respond to the actual market rather than you're thinking about what the market is.
Nice. Oh, and one more thing I'll add to it: DaVinci Resolve. Just get that right away, because you're going to buy Adobe or one of the other products for your video editing, and you're going to learn it, and you're going to get really good, and then you're going to find at the top end you actually can't do things you like. Then you're just going to grab what the pros actually use, and the initial version that has like 90% of the features is free. And so then by the time you get good with it, then you'll be able to afford the paid version if you need it. So I'm telling you right now, to save you a lot of hassle of having to learn a whole different set of software. $5 super chat. Thanks, Alex. He's one of our guys from our Patreon. Hitting 15 miles on a 24-hour. Are you running 15 miles on a 24-hour fast? Damn. Weight's on point, ready to fight. Awesome, man. Good for you. What was the thing? Oh, minimum viable product. Here's the part where I was going to leverage it. We're going to fluff you a little bit more. Editing. Obviously, anybody who's been following me knows I had a hell of a time with editing. The Patreon guys know the details. I won't bore you with them. But was it a master's degree in English Lit, or I want to get this right? What was your degree again?
I got a master's in linguistics and literature, which.
Oh, that's why you read Chomsky.
Right. I didn't do it because I wanted to.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So editors, and I know everybody knows they're important. If you do anything, the first thing you're told is don't edit your own work, because you, in your head, you know what you're trying to say. So when you read the page, that's what you're inferring from what you read. But a second set of eyes can notice that glaring difference. And I've since started to read, like I did what every guy does when you release a book, and Rollo's been telling me about this. You look at all the competition and you read all the first chapters of theirs to see how you stack up and what's that a page number and all this stuff. And I realized, and you kind of brought this to my attention mostly, but like a lot of us just aren't very good at finishing the product, getting it past that minimum viable product and putting proper polish on it. And I was hoping we could talk at length on that. We can call out people or call out books if you want, or not, or we can just be general about it. It's your call.
Well, I mean, you got to look at it this way. When I was teaching writing, one of the early class sessions that we always had and that I was always sure to go over was people tend to think about writing as, the piece of paper with some shit written on it that you're finished with, that you hand into the teacher or that you send into the publisher or whatever. But it's better to look at writing as a process, because it is. And the thing that, talk about being unable to start and paralysis by analysis, and that dynamic is, a lot of people, they think that if it's not perfect as they're spilling it out on the page, then there's something, then they're just not a good writer and there's something wrong with them. And the truth of the matter is that anybody who reads, if you read Stephen King or Dean Koontz or Ernest Hemingway or any popular or literary author that came through the publishing system, those guys often turn in manuscripts that are a train wreck. And they're great storytellers, and one of the reasons their books are so good is because they focus on the story and the storytelling, because they know that there's a professional editor at that publishing house who's going to clean it up for them and who's going to find the parts where they're not making themselves clear, or they've screwed up the grammar so badly that the ideas aren't coming across. And there are people whose job is to sort that out for them, and they let them. And that's one of the reasons why publishing works in the traditional sense. With the problem, and I posted about this on Twitter, that self-published and independent writers have, is they are doing all the work more or less themselves, and they don't have usually a good editor, or they don't take the time to spend some money to hire a good editor to do that cleanup on the back end of it for them before they release their book. And I read a lot of, because I'm trying to get into this business now in supporting and promoting independent writers through giving them a platform like Punch Riot and some other things I have coming down the road, and also just by offering some decent editing services. I'm trying to help independent writers jump that gap where the quality of their finished work can match the quality of their storytelling.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So I know some guys have an issue with it because they don't like the idea of cost. They don't expect their books to make enough money to justify the cost of an editor. And I'm just, to me, I would think, because books don't have like a 90 day, it's not like a video game where 90 days are 99% of the sales. They kind of have a long tail, do they not?
I think so. I'm just now getting into that end of it because I've never really been in publishing before, but it seems like that's the case.
Because that's the one thing I'm wondering then. So yeah, maybe your first month is your peak month on sales if you want to get a book out there. Like, obviously you want it to make money. Maybe it's not going to be your livelihood, but nobody wants to do something that costs them money as opposed to makes them money. But at the same time, if it's not readable, then nobody's going to want to read it. And it seems whether you're in it for the money, you want to put up a proper product just so it's worth the money that it's costing, or you want to put your art out there or your creativity out there or put a message out there, then it'll completely get lost on somebody if you haven't put that money front end investing in editing. It seems no different than a guy doing game where he has to work out. Well, working out takes too long. Like, yeah, but being fat doesn't help you get chicks either.
Well, yeah, and that's the comparison I was going to make, because imagine being somebody who's getting, showering and getting dressed to go out for the night to hopefully meet some women, and his attitude is, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to put on a clean shirt because I'm probably not going to get lucky anyway. That kind of attitude. And it's like, if you're going to, and to put it in terms of game and work and things like that, if you're going to take the time to work out, and if you're going to take the time to wear cologne, have a style, do things that put you on point as far as either meeting women or making a good impression at work, then why would you be so sloppy about a book you write that you have spent hours and months and maybe even years on, and then not have that final, then release it with a wrinkled shirt instead of just paying somebody a little bit more money to iron your shirt for you? And it's almost like you don't really you don't really believe in it to begin with. You're just like checking something off a list, but you don't really care. And I think that's a shame, because I'm reading some books now that are, the storytelling is absolutely off the charts. You know, some of these things would make great movies, but there are places in it where the sentences and the language and everything is so jumbled up that you have to kind of fight your way through it and figure out, all right, what did he say? And that detracts from the reader's enjoyment of the work. And it's like you don't have enough respect for your reader to try to give them the best experience possible. And it's like opening up a restaurant, but then leaving dead cockroaches all over the floor. Yeah.
I've been to some of those restaurants. Not a fan of them. Montreal's a horrible place for that.
Oh.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's about giving a shit about what you do.
Right.
All of it together. I was thinking sexual marketplace. That's true. I mean, a lot of the guys talking about how they can't get women. And for the most part, I've found a 5-minute conversation or just like a quick clip of like 30 seconds of them doing something. You can usually point out like 80% of your problems are self-inflicted because you just aren't trying enough. You aren't caring enough. And yeah, beyond that, like you said, if your storytelling is bad, or if a guy's legitimately like he's missing 2 arms and a leg, like there's some things you just can't out train.
Right.
But I think for the most part, the vast majority of people, their problems are self-inflicted, whether it comes to publishing or game or anything. And I know this because everybody you try to convince that that's the case will fight you tooth and nail.
Yeah, I think so. And I probably went through 2/3 of my life. Anytime I ran into a major problem, and I was never that much of a whiner or a quitter, but it's always really easy to say, well, you know, this would have been great except for that guy, or except for that chick, or, you know, except for this situation, or why am I such a victim of circumstance? Oh, woe is me, all that, you know, crap. And I did come to a point in my life where if I were being honest with myself, I could see how I was the largest ingredient of that failure or that problem relative to everybody else. Other people may have contributed some, but it was still my fuck up. And I think that's a big turning point for a man. And you need, you know, it's a shame that for some of us, it takes so long. But, but when you can get to that point, then I think that, and I know my life since I got to that point, and I think flipped the script for myself, has been way better and more enjoyable than previous. So I think that mindset applies to everything. And, you know, the book production and the editing and that whole process, you know, is part of that too.
Yeah. Well, it puts you in control. That's the thing. Right. Like, I think my relationship strategy, the way I articulate it is, like I say, your wife's a huge bitch and she won't sleep with you and she's going to take the kids, half your divorce, whatever. It's your responsibility, and thinking about fault is something for kids and women to worry about. Because at some point, if you take this whole scenario and you walk it back far enough, there's a point where you opted in to your own misery. And that's the point that you take responsibility and consider, okay, that part was my fault. I married a girl who was clearly a hoe, or I let myself go and then she found another dude, or maybe I just wanted somebody and I picked one who was like, there's always some point where you could say, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. And maybe you couldn't have seen what came after it, but I think that's life. Most of the time when we make decisions, we don't know the consequences, especially when you're young, but then you learn them.
Yeah.
And it can, I feel bad because guys just aren't willing to learn, which I guess is a problem with the internet too, how you said everybody spreads information. So everybody can kind of get a good idea about, okay, so if I do this, this is going to happen. And so they just don't make their own mistakes and understand that process is an important process, when instead, well, I'll just see what somebody else did in the internet and I'll replicate that, which is how you get these MGTOW. I call them second wave MGTOWs, kind of give them call them like feminists. Where it's the never get married thing is a great line, but at that point, they just completely off the rails. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think the thing that bothers me about it all, and I think you and I talked about this when you were on my podcast a little bit, about one of the things, since I've had so much time on my hands recently, that I've wanted to figure out is really sit down and think, sitting down and reading a 300-page book is kind of an odd it's kind of an odd exercise. It's kind of an odd activity. And why are there movies? And why are people so drawn to movies? And especially these days, it's almost certain movies and certain universes that are created in movies have almost become a kind of they've inspired an almost religious sort of devotion to them. And so I started doing a little bit of extra reading on evolutionary biology, psychology, and anthropology, stuff like that. And there's one of the things that enabled Homo sapiens to advance beyond the other early human species and probably kill them off, most likely, at least that's one of the major theories, is our ability to communicate abstractly and to communicate in a much more heightened way with a slightly better developed brain as time went on than the other species did. And there's kind of an evolved capacity and need for stories and storytelling that kind of help drive that, because way back when, sitting around the campfire, making up mythology and telling stories about why did we win this particular war or this battle with this other tribe, or why should we go exterminate all those brutes and because they're different from us. All of those things have a story wrapped around them or are an integral part of the thinking there. And I think over time we just developed and thrived on that level of ability to communicate. And I would argue that we have an almost biological need for stories. It's almost the water we swim in. And when we make excuses for ourselves, when we talk about why is that person successful, why do I keep failing? If you really think about it, there's a story playing in the background there.
Oh, 100%.
It's a whole drama of, oh, well, I tried to do this, and then this, big monster came over and did this, and there are all these forces aligned against me, and there's this whole struggle, but I'm really this noble guy. I'm like Sisyphus. I just keep, pushing that rock up the hill and having it crush me again. But there's nobility in that for this reason. And we have all of these stories going in the background of our minds that we feed and that we use to justify almost everything that we do. And I think that the failure to come to terms with that has a lot to do with why we get into such self-destructive patterns and refuse to get out of them. It's because that storytelling in our mind, we've totally bought into it like it's a mythology, and it justifies taking the path of least resistance.
Yeah. Oh, quick pause on this one. Doug Chisholm, thank you for the $9.99 super chat. Do you think it's our ego getting in the way when we fight the things we know deep down are our failure? I guess you kind of just answered this, though. And if so, what do you suggest we do to make corrective action? This is one I can handle. The short answer is get something to traumatize you, and then it increases your neuroplasticity. Because what you were describing, a lot of like clinical and evolutionary psychologists and military even refer to them as mental models. The story in your head you anchor your decisions to. And our brains are lazy. And like you said, it's not like a lack of willpower. It's that our brains want to conserve energy. They take like 20% of the energy we eat. Well, maybe not in the States, but 25% of the energy that we eat. And so they're very, very efficient, and they will not change these mental models because they're useful enough until something happens that causes like a flight or fight response or some major sort of trauma. Then the brain's like, all right, it's like an adrenaline rush, but for your brain, where you realize if I don't change this, I'm not going to survive. And so here's the question that it sucks because it's not a good answer, but it's the only answer. I've yet to see a guy who ultimately changes his worldview without some sort of trauma preceding it. You just need it for the neuroplasticity. And I've been working hard to try and find if there's a magic set of words. Best I can come up with is, manufacture the hardship. But then again, it's like telling a kid to do his homework when school's out. Like, he kind of can do it, but without that threat of expulsion under him, he doesn't really work anyway. I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. If you have any thoughts on it, then we'll touch Phil's here.
Well, I think it has to, and I tend to approach things from act first, think later, and that's kind of backwards, and that can get you in trouble in some circumstances. But the way I mean it is, if you want to change, like for myself, when I got divorced and wanted to decide, all right, what am I going to do about dating and women going forward, and my thought was, well, first I need to get myself out there and just start dating again, which was weird after being married 20 years. But actually just going out there and doing it and not overthinking and not being afraid to fail is for me, it's the key. And I try to keep things as simple as possible for myself. And so it was more a matter of, I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to do two things. One, and I stumbled. This is why I think that people overcomplicate things, and people also who smash on the red pill mindset so much, they just have another axe to grind. Because before I found out about all that stuff, I didn't know what PUA was. I didn't know what any of that shit was. I was divorced, and I didn't want to repeat the same mistakes I had made before. And just in my observing things and talking with friends of mine, I realized that most of the problems dudes had was they had what I came to understand was called that scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. I just saw it as guys were desperate, and they would just settle down with the first thing that would give them the time of day or open their legs for them. And I said that, that's a stupid way to go. And the second thing was, it's an ego thing. People are afraid to get embarrassed and shot down. And I just had this ever since I saw that movie, 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Oh yeah.
Anytime I start going down a road like that's kind of weak, I hear the Korean wax girl in the back of my head say, "You pussy," and just like she did in that movie. And I just said, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do it. And I wasn't that bad with women before marriage, but I was really out of practice, and I certainly didn't have the mindset then that I do now. And so I just started going out there and doing it and picking up and piecing things together. And the more I did that, the more I realized, hey, you're not getting shot down as much as you thought you were. And then even when you did, it's just really kind of funny. And I learned to look at it like, getting shot down is just as much fun as being successful.
Yeah, there's a good story behind it. Why not, right?
You learn something from it either way. And it usually is pretty funny if you can get past your own sense of, humiliation or whatever. And so after a while, it doesn't, the little bit of nervousness may not ever really go away, but it's sort of like if you're used to, the first time you climb a tree stand to go deer hunting and you're 20 feet up a tree and you have problems with heights, or the first time you fly on a plane, you might be nervous about it. But the 50th time you do it, you're aware that you could be nervous about it, but it doesn't really bother you that much anymore because you've just had enough repetitions to where you accept the situation for what it is, and you just plow forward anyway. And so I think that, for me, that's always been the thing, is act first and use those actions over time to change your mindset almost without you having to really put a lot of mental energy into it. If you can just push yourself forward and do things, that will have an effect on what your attitude and your thinking on it is.
Oh, I 100% agree. I'm going to segue this one to the next question from Phil here, where we're essentially describing that, by the way, where he says, could you talk a little about narcissistic fantasies? How do you mean them? Is this when a guy gets angry because he gets rejected by a girl and the world didn't turn out exactly as he wanted? Sort of. So if you notice, here, I'm going to get this out of here because you can't see. We're talking like Wilson off the Home Improvement show. We talked about stories, mental models, deep narratives. These are all concepts that are fairly well established. Everybody has a story in their head. Now, usually in a healthy individual, that story's built because of, like Nick was saying, he did things as a kid. He talked to Susie. Susie touched Dick. He's all happy about that. He builds a certain mental model about how to treat things in the world. Narcissism, and in this case, we're not going to talk about, like, think of it like a spectrum. We're talking about like third standard deviation, 90th percentile kind of narcissism here. Those stories aren't built off of experience. They're built off of wish fulfillment. And this is why I absolutely hate when guys refer to themselves as alpha males. Because the problem with alpha males is in their head, I'm the perfect man. I'm the pinnacle of man. I'm legends of man. That's why you always see them. They always have to have alpha, pinnacle, legend, like some adjective, and like a wolf or some kind of masculine beast. And they have this image of what they have in their head. So they get attached to this narrative. But since the narrative's not attached to reality, it constantly has problems with their decisions process. And because we're so attached to the narrative, same as any normal person would be, when something goes against that narrative, the response to that is what they call narcissistic rage, which is different than anger. Anger is a social emotion. If I stub my toe, I get hurt, but I don't get angry. But if Nick drops a hammer on it because he doesn't like me, I get angry. It's like a social grievance thing. It's letting you know, look, I'm going to get violent, so you better stop pissing me off. And then the other person gets the signal, sorry, man, my bad, didn't mean anything by it. Rage is like how a 2-year-old has a temper tantrum and just screaming on the floor when they're colic. Total limbic brain. So narcissistic fantasies, for the most part, are the exact same way we process every other decision-making mental model in our life, except for it wasn't built, it was invented. And that's coming back to Nick's example where he talked about you went out, got rejected, you realize, rejection's not so bad, and it didn't happen as much as I thought. You put a wink, wink alpha male in that situation, well, he's God's gift to women. And if a woman shoots him down, it's not that he's angry, like she didn't grieve him, but she went against that narrative, that mental model, that story he's gotten ahead of how awesome he is, and she'd be happy to see him. So what does he do? He lashes out. And this is where you get that classic story of a guy getting shot down and saying, she must be a lesbian. But because there's clearly nothing wrong with him. And that's how he has to like rewrite the narrative to fit him. And that's a tame example. Some guys get violent. Some guys absolutely lose their mind. Like, I'm sure there's a Twitter example I can think of the past 3 weeks where an wink, wink alpha male loses their shit because somebody just didn't follow their mental model.
Yeah.
I can't think of any Lamborghini owning example of that in the last month, but whatever. Hopefully that answered it. I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Who, me?
Sure, why not? I'm busy chuckling over my cleverness.
Well, I think the thing about that whole narcissistic mental model or conflict or problem is exactly like you said. It's when somebody is exposed for who they're not, but who they thought they were. And I think that in itself is kind of a traumatizing thing for them, because the compensation has always been, it goes back to that inflating some kind of story about yourself, inventing some kind of story about yourself as the hero of some, grand adventure who's constantly, up against adversity and all this other stuff. And you build up this image of yourself in your mind to the point where it's not, it bears no comparison or resemblance to how you actually live your life, what you actually do. And then when something happens that exposes you to yourself as well as to everybody else for that, it becomes it kind of shatters. I don't know if it's makes sense to say it shatters your ego, or it just shatters that mental model or image you have of yourself. And then you realize, man, everything I've done up until now has been bullshit.
Or more likely you try and rewrite this thing.
Well, yeah, and that's my point. You're there, and that's an opportunity to go in one of two directions. You can accept that, I'm not the person I thought I was, but I can become, a reasonable version of that person if I do the work. Or you just double back down and you rewrite the story to, inflate yourself back up again and avoid the reality that has just been demonstrated to you. And then you just end up getting even worse and further gone with, less of an opportunity possibly down the road to correct it, ever. So I think that's I think that's sort of the position, the decision that people come to a lot of times. And it's like you said earlier, it's that trauma, whether it's, you know, something that's more internal and personal, or whether it has to do with your marriage failing, or whatever else you have to accept about yourself and accept responsibility for having, you know, gotten yourself to the place where you are. You can either accept that responsibility or not. And whether you do or not really determines the course of everything from that point forward, until you have your next opportunity to do the same thing again, because there will be another trauma at some point.
100%. All right. So back to editing here. By the way, so I don't we're talking about editing here, and small disclosure, I really like Nick's service. I've used it myself for my second revision of my Kindle and my paperback one, but I would strongly suggest, like, he's the third editor I've hired, and he's the first one that did the job properly the first time. We'll skip on in a sec. This will be our like mid ad roll commercial thing. How do people, if they wanted to use your services, obviously check my Kindle book, the one that's been released after April 30th, I guess. I think that was when it came out. After April 30th, to see if you like his work. And if you do, how do they end up seeing how they can get you for theirs? Because a lot of people here, I know at least a few people in the chat have at least manuscripts 50% of the way through that never finished them yet. And I'm kind of wanting to kick them in the ass to do it.
Yeah, well, in order to just get in touch with me, you can either, if you're on Twitter, you can find me at the Nick August on Twitter, but I also have a website, nickaugust.xyz, and there's a page on there that talks about my my newly launched editing services. And it's better to get, if you're going to do it, it's better to get hooked up with me early on in the process as possible, because we can, similar to how I would pitch people who wanted to hire me for technology consulting, depending on what you need and what you want, there are a lot of different levels and options and pricing that we can figure out based on what your needs are. So, if you want to save as much money as possible and just want me to do a little bit of copy editing and, maybe fix a little grammar here and there, but not go any further than that, then, it'll be a little bit cheaper. If you want me to help a little bit more with structure and doing a little bit of revising where, your grammar's all fucked up and you need me to straighten out the language a little bit so it more accurately gets across what you're trying to say. That's a little bit more expensive, but I think it's worth it to get that done up front rather than release something that has a lot of problems and then having to hire me to come back in and fix it later. So, that's kind of my elevator pitch on it and how I see it playing out. And anybody who wants to talk to me about that can just check out nickaugust.xyz and shoot me an email, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, self-interest here. I just want to read more books. Here's one thing. So Roland and I were talking about this on Patreon. Let me see if I can pull it up. Was it Coach Greg Adams or? Damn it, I'm trying to remember. There was a book, and I'm going to show guys. You're talking about the reading experience a lot, and I wish more guys would focus on that because, oh, that's right, alpha male strategies. So Rolo's got a big rant about this stuff. I'm just going to pull up. There we go. I'm going to show you exactly what he's talking about here when he talks about the user experience. Not to bag on the guy. I haven't read the book yet. It may be deliciously good. So look at this cover. What the? Oh, feminism, whatever. I want to see the cover, not the thing. Well, you can see it, I guess, good enough. White text, white background. I can't read the thing. Yeah, that there. You can't see anything.
Well, I'm not seeing what you're talking about. I'm just
the
seeing
cover on the screenshot here for alpha male strategies, dating techniques in the social media age. He's got a white background with white text that you can't read. And we were talking before. All right, I don't want to bag on the guy because whatever, but when you're talking about the reading experience, everything comes to it. Part of the cover, your font selection, or typography, how you lay it out, the white space, the size of your font, everything matters. And it's funny. It takes, I wouldn't, a 30%, I would say, of my process of writing was just getting it to look the way you're supposed to read from it. And this is subtext. If you guys think in dating, it's exactly the same as like John's body language mastery, or the reason, like having to run a routine from like the mystery method, but you know why you're doing certain things, but it looks completely innocent on the outside, or running the cube, which is really just getting a girl to tell you about her inner desires without making it sound like an interview. All these things matter. So like when you see a book and it's just got a standard thing like that, or it's not readable, it tells somebody, like Nick was saying earlier, that like, why should I care about the package? And same as like wearing a dirty shirt or an unironed shirt or shitty shoes. Why would I care about this guy when he doesn't even care about himself? I would say like, you're the only guy that wipes your ass every day without complaint. So start treating that guy like he does, like you like the guy, I guess is the best way of saying it.
Well, there's, the thing about, on the editing side of it, what I've run into over the years, both with students, and then, I have done a little bit of professional editing as well as some professional writing, mainly in the tech space. But the thing I always run into is, oh, well, that's just a comma, and that's just this, and that's just one misspelled word. And they're right. If that was the only thing in the entire 200 pages that was a problem, it wouldn't be a big deal. And it reminds me of the conversations I used to have with my kids about, they drop a dime or a quarter or something if we were out at the store and they bought something, and they wouldn't go back and pick it up. And I would go back and pick it up, and they were always like, well, it's just a dime. It's just a penny. It's just a nickel. And I said, okay. And so what I did for a year was I would just pick up everybody's loose change that was always laying around somewhere and put it in a jar. Mm-hmm. And then one day and I did this on purpose, I was going to the bank, and I was dumping that big jar of change into one of those money counters and getting cash for it. And my son said, hey, where are you going with that? I said, to the bank. I'm gonna change it in. And he said, where'd you get all that change? And I said, well, it's mostly yours. I've been picking it up over the last year. You didn't want it. So I went, dumped it in the thing. I came back with $100, and I said, yeah, this is how much it was. And, I'm going to go buy some ammo with it or something. And he was just, he was stunned just looking at me like, what the hell is going on? And the grammar thing is very similar. Yeah. One comma here, one comma there. It doesn't make that big a deal. When it's, when it happens 5 times on a page throughout the entire book, and you have these long passages just strung together with commas, people don't understand how confusing that can get for the person reading it. And the writer, and like you said earlier, you should never edit your own book. And this is the reason why, because you as the writer, it makes perfect sense to you, because it's just recalling in your mind what the story you're telling or what you were trying to explain. For the dumb schlub on the other end of the book who's just reading it, it comes across in a completely different way, because they don't know where you're going with it. They don't know what you're thinking of it is, except in the way you express that on the page. And so if that's all jumbled up, then people are either going to come away with something completely different than what you intended, because then they're going to search their minds to try to decipher it for themselves, or they're just going to say, fuck this is unreadable, so I'm not going to read it. And again, why do the work if you're not going to do the absolute best you can with it and put out the absolute best product that you can?
Dude, that's such a parallel to dating. Like, it's not even funny.
Right.
In my mind, I know exactly what I have to say, and I know what I want to do, and I know I'm a great guy. And how does she not know? How can she not see this? And meanwhile, all she sees is a guy staring at his feet, stuttering and stammering, asking for Bob's and Vagine.
Exactly. And you think about it in terms of the, one of the things that you mentioned in your book, which is, every 3 times she reaches out to you, you respond twice, or, you have that kind of ratio to it. You respond less than she does. And that medium is the message kind of approach to it has a lot to do with, not manipulating her necessarily. It's about you controlling yourself so that you put forth the best the best version of yourself that you can. If you sit there and every time she reaches out to you, you type an essay about all the things you like and all the questions you have about her and everything else, you may be a great guy and you may be, totally sincere and you may be a fun person to hang around with, but that's not what you're communicating by just vomiting on the screen or the page like that. And it's the same kind of thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So many guys don't know what they're saying. And that's kind of why I'm pushing the storytelling side of this thing more, because guys are they love systemization. I don't know if you've seen this, but everybody has, and I've even done it myself, so I'm not saying I'm above it all, but that 5 lists of what makes a quality woman. Number 3 will surprise you. 7 things to prioritize more than women. 5 reasons why bitches ain't shit. You know what I mean? It's like literally a checklist of, okay, yeah. So if I want a woman, as long as she doesn't eat, has no tattoos, and her hair is at least 6 inches long, then my life is perfect. And guys are like, yeah, that's awesome. Here's my subscribe and smashing the like button. I love it. By the way, guys, smash the like button if you like this content. But that's the problem, is that it's all systemized and it's all lists. And Rollo rants about it all the time, where it's guys want the how-to manual. Put DA into slot V and pump 3 times, not 4, because alpha males only do 3. Do you go down on a girl? Do you not? Well, is this an alpha? And it's all this convoluted dance of superstition, and makes no sense. It makes sense now why everybody is getting into like chakras and stuff, because they're kind of treating dating with that same sort of superstition. Like, oh, never lean in on your photos. Like, really? So if you lean in once in your relationship, it's over. It's almost like it's not really a big deal, other than, like you said, what it symbolizes behind the thing. And I would think for guys getting better at reading and writing and creating and painting and doing videos is they start to learn about subtext, and so they can actually apply it better dating wise.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I have a picture of girl I've been seeing for about a year, and I at a golf tournament, and we're standing on, golf courses are hilly and slopey and everything, and so we're standing on the side of this hill. It's a gentle slope, but I'm standing on the high side, so I'm leaning back down toward her just because of physics and gravity. And I showed that picture to somebody, and they're like, "Hey, what's up, dude? I thought you were strong. What are you leaning in for?" And I said, "I'm not leaning in. I'm standing on the side of a fucking hill." And what the hell? Why you just, everybody's just so keyed in on like all this shit that the context gets totally lost, and people don't stop and think about, is he really leaning in? Does it even matter? And it's just kind of crazy. And it's I mean, I think those things, having good frame is important. I try to do that. If my chick and I are getting our picture taken, I'm usually standing up straight, and she's the one who's leaning all into me. But I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it, because, who fucking cares? I know what my standing is in the relationship, so I just don't really worry about it too much. And I think people who lack experience tend to focus more on that pedantic stuff, because they don't understand that there's a lot more going on possibly than what they see. So they want to focus in on something to bitch about, really to justify their own lack of success or whatever. And who cares? I mean,
care a bit. It's like, care until you don't have to care. Like you said, if you're completely supplicative and you're always leaning in on photos, it's not because you're leaning in. It's because you really want mommy to validate you. But that's like my joke about how, like, how that power posture crap that was floating around a while, where your testosterone's up when you're standing better. And I'm like, here's the best way to improve your posture. So this one trick they'll never tell you, and it's been in my drafts folder forever. It's like, if you work out and you hit your muscles and you build like 5 pounds of muscle, it's going to fix your posture, and nobody's going to know this trick. Kind of making light of that. Oh, it's just the one little trick is all you need. And all this trick is do things that objectively increase your sexual market value. And then the result is you'll be able to feed all these stupid little, you'll never lean in that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's why one of the reasons I liked your book was because, there's there was not a checklist. The book's kind of organized around, specific ideas per chapter or whatever, but it's really more telling the story about where your head has been at and where, kind of like where you started and where you ended up and what that looked like in living your life. So it's kind of like this instructive memoir or something where you're sharing all these experiences you actually had, and there's, you're very honest about it, and it's not like this big hyped up thing. It's like, here's the story of how I got from where I was to where I am now. And I think that's a great way to teach mindset, because by the time you get to the end of your book, you have a very strong sense of what your attitude and your thinking was going through all that. And I think reproducing that experience for the dudes reading it gives them a sense of what their mindset should be when they go out and do the same things. And I think if all somebody does is give, checklists about do this, do this, do this, then they lose that bigger picture of it. And I think those details are important, but that bigger picture and that attitude and that mindset is important too. And I think that was a good way to get that across, because I haven't read too many books that kind of did that and did it with that kind of, storytelling behind it, which is probably the reason I enjoyed it so much. But I think that's good. And I think that's something that recommends the book. Having now, I read it once just because I read it, and then I had to read it again when I edited it. So I got the double dose in the span of a couple of days, and I thought that was interesting though. That was a good technique, good approach.
Dude, you have no idea though how big of a deal that is, because for 12 years in the military, I knew military writing, and I don't know if you've ever seen military writing. For example, like, don't use the, or, and, anything that's like 3 letters or less, you essentially strip it. Everything's an acronym. So if I want to talk like somebody just got loaded onto a course, I'd have SBJ, so subject member, MBR, posted, POSTD, and then like a serial number and that. And that's like all of my writing was essentially missing any adjectives. Like, I don't even know what an adjective was till I was 30. And so when I first started writing again, and it was just field reports about me like fixing my relationship, apparently people were really kind to me, because the people like Purple Pill Debate, those guys love to just throw shit at the Red Pill guys. Because they think they're alpha. Meanwhile, they're solving problems about their life that's not perfect. Like, why do you think we're here? But that was like the main critique, is that I was functionally illiterate. And so like it took 2 years just to be able to string a sentence together to get an idea across with like words in the proper place, like a pronoun. Hey, I did this, he did that. How novel. As opposed to just, I know who it's about because it's in the subject line in format line 5.
I mean, and the thing about that is writing well is very difficult. I don't think people, once you get out of school, you don't really write much anymore at all, and unless it's something that you want to pursue deliberately, and even then, it takes it's like golf. They always talk about how it takes a long time just to get bad at it. And writing is kind of the same way. It's not an easy thing to do, because there's such a disconnect. Well, first of all, the quality of your writing is driven largely by the quality of your thinking. But then there's a big difference between the way we think and talk and then what makes sense on a written page. And it's not just a one-to-one sort of translation. You can't just dump everything in your head onto paper. You actually have to structure it, and it's not an easy thing to do, and you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot to get better at it. At least most people do, and I don't think people appreciate and really understand that. And that's why, going back to the editing thing, that's why it's helpful to have an editor or work with somebody who at least can challenge you and bounce, reflect back to you. All right, here's how this is actually coming across to me. And I've probably had to deal with that more in my tech gigs than I have really in writing, because it really works out the same way. We can, I can develop an app, I can put an interface together, and I know what it's supposed to do. But then, when we would release it to, say, a beta testing group, they would try to use it in ways that I thought were absolutely ridiculous. And I couldn't understand why they didn't understand, if you click that button over there, here's what you get. and getting that feedback from them and seeing how they actually look at it and thought they were supposed to use it really shows you the disconnect between how everything can look one way in your head, but objectively it ends up being a totally different experience for the rest of humanity. So you have to have somebody to challenge and reflect back to you what it is you're actually putting out as opposed to what you think you're putting out.
Yeah. Oh, 100. And here's solipsism, used a lot in this space. A lot of guys hear about it. It's essentially, it's the idea that nothing exists outside your own head, with the inference that that's how women approach the world. Well, for the most part, I'd say it's true. How does this revolve around me? How does this make me feel? Makes total sense. Most guys, I think there was an example we had. It was really early on. I wish I could find the post. I'm pretty good at this, but the guy understood solipsism when he asked his wife for a fork. He was just like, he was trying to find a fork and he's like, hey babe, I can't find the forks. You know where they are? And her answer was, well, I didn't lose them. And then right then he's like, I understand solipsism now. It was just something so simple as that. And he goes, oh, so everything is filtered around, what does this mean for me? How does this make me feel? What is he saying about me with this sentence? It's not just information. And I think that's like a great, once you understand solipsism and you understand subtext and you understand storytelling, you've essentially understood the human condition. It's just, learning the different iterations of it. And it made me laugh. And for a lot of guys, I think we are becoming solipsistic in the same way that men are being raised as defective women in multiple areas. Like you said, vampire novels and in that, or, the movies are only about comic books and you have to get emotionally attached to them. It's just one other manifestation of it where we start thinking of things and we refer to that stuff as narcissism, but I think it's closer to solipsism, because if it was narcissism, there'd be like a self-grandiosity to it, as opposed to like these guys, they call them black pill, that everything is woe is me. It's still like the women are just trying to keep me down, as if they give a shit about some 22-year-old STEM student who can't get laid. Like they don't even know he exists, which is more frightening, at least with an enemy in your back. Then that lets you know you're at least on the table. But they're like, who the hell are you? Nobody's keeping you down. Nobody even likes you. Go away.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in a lot of different things. You see it in politics too, where people, want to blame the banks, the government, the Illuminati, the lizard people, whoever, for, keeping them down because they live in a trailer park out in South Alabama somewhere. But the fact of the matter is, those things may exist, and there are, banks are shitty, the government's shitty. I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
But
a lot of Clinton's friends are suiciding. Yeah.
Yeah, but the truth is, you can carve out a decent life for yourself if you want to. And if you don't want to just sit around and say, well, women are just going to screw me over and the government's just going to screw me over, so I'm going to, work at Domino's and I'm going to make just enough money to pay my rent and I'll eat free pizza the rest of my life and sit on the couch and play video games or whatever. I mean, that's absurd and that's ridiculous, but that's how powerful bad thinking is. That's how powerful those, dumbass stories that we can tell ourselves. One of the things I say is that that I'm always, spouting off on Twitter about anyway, is that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves destroy us because we get over invested in making excuses, essentially, and justifications, rather than just saying, yeah, my wife cheated on me, my business partner screwed me, the government did this. None of that means you can't go out, make more money, clean yourself up, get in good shape, have, whether you want relationships or you just want a series of one-night stands or whatever kind of companionship you want from women, it's all possible. It's all out there. If you don't have it, it's because, for the most part, it's because you don't want it. And
you know what I love about
that's where we end up with that kind of thinking.
You know what I love about this audience? You guys are switched on, by the way. I mean, you smash the like button, you listen intently. It's perfect. Here's what I like about you guys specifically, audience people. I don't know what else to call you. You go on a Rolo's channel or Rich's channel or anybody else's channel, and after somebody says something like that, there's one chode in the comments saying, but I have Crohn's, or some like reason to shut this down, like to completely dismiss it. Not one person in this chat right now disagrees with that, which means nobody in here is a loser, which is awesome. Now, I know, obviously, I'm biased in telling you guys you're awesome. Alpha male, noble, aristocrats of the soul. There's an Evola line for you. If that's not narcissistic fantasy, I don't know what is. Nobody understands you but us. You're an aristocrat, and everybody else is keeping you down, and the church is bad, and paganism is good. Where was I going with this one? Oh, yeah. I don't know. I just like that there's no losers here. Yeah, that was it. There was no real point. It's just a meandering. There's the 7 commas in a sentence that nobody knows what the ending was supposed to be about. That's why you gotta make shorter points. Oh. So what we got here in the chat? By the way, I thought it was hilarious. Back to the wolf reference. It was something like 10 minutes ago. So there was a Married Red Pill, the subreddit I was from. We always had a thing that any time guys would name their username something to do with a wolf, like Alpha as Wolf or like Wolf Pack or whatever. It was always a guy who had like a horrible narcissistic fantasy. And then 3 months in, he thought he was doing like dread to get his marriage back, and he'd do something stupid and screw it all up. And then he'd lash out at us because it's our fault for giving him bad advice. Meanwhile, he like never followed any of it.
Right.
So it's always like the big joke whenever you see a guy who's named something to do with a wolf that you just know he's going to burn out. And SD, one of like the 3 girls in the chat, said she was dating a guy who was a self-proclaimed alpha male, and he used to nickname himself the Wolf. And I think there's something to it. Like there's something about wolves in particular that bring out the worst in men. I don't know how to follow through on that, but it's just something to think about. Maybe add that in a Punch Riot article later on. Wolfman. Wolfman the failure.
That's a good idea. And I just recorded a podcast the other day with MT White where it was my second podcast with him, and we did that to focus solely on his new novel that just came out, content, and what one of the things that we talked about was how, and this is, I won't go too far here because this is getting off topic, but how he had this passage in the book talking about how cyberspace is like an actual manifestation of the ancient philosophy of Gnosticism, where the mind and the spirit are totally separate from the body, and you can actually there's a sense in which people getting on the internet and sort of LARPing with their usernames and the personas they create for themselves, it's kind of like following that Gnostic philosophy that was around during the days of early Christianity. And there's all this other crap that we went into there, but I think that has a lot to do with it. I think there's the internet is fantasy land, and you can be whoever you want to be. You can pretend to be whoever you want to be. And the more colorful people get with their usernames and stuff like that, a lot of times that, their attitude is, I just see this guy at home just banging out all this intense shit, hammering out, punishing his keyboard almost, getting all that narcissistic crap he's got boiling in his head out there in front of the world because he can, and there's no way to call him on it really. And I look at that as, I think that's a sad thing. I don't look at it as like an annoyance for the rest of us out there.
That's because you're not a moderator.
Board. It's really a one-way communication because there's nobody sitting there in front of you to say, you weigh 300 pounds and you've got Cheeto dust on your shirt. It's that kind of thing, and it's sad because it enables people to just double down on their delusions rather than do something about it.
Yeah, and people buy into it too. I think there's like a shared delusion thing happening. Like I'll dunk on these Central Florida guys. You guys may not know about it. There's this dude named Socrates, which should tell you everything you know. He looks like if Colonel Sanders ate all the chicken. And all he does is he shits on Rollo every day, which whatever. Shit on Rollo if you want to. He's not my brother's keeper. But the problem is he doesn't do anything. Like he just takes what Rollo says. Rollo will say hypergamy. So Socrates will talk about hypogamy. And you'll just say it applies to men too, see? And brings up this convoluted thing. And I thought I should have known something was up when I realized the username was Socrates. But you're right. And I'm actually starting to think now. Like Carl, Black Label Logic. It's because he likes to drink. Makes sense. Ryan Stone. It was basically like my middle name was Ryan. So I'm like, all right, I'll go with that. Rollo Tomasi was just a guy from a movie. But then you see like Pinnacle of Men, Alpha Male Strategies, or I don't follow any of these guys. So I'm really, my references are dated. I don't know if you've been blocked by half the sphere yet. I've blocked 90% of it and been blocked by 80%. So I don't even know. Apparently, I'm part of this thing. I don't know anybody in it anymore. But
I've
some
been
of the
blocked by
usernames,
people, but I'm such small potatoes on the internet that nobody really even
dude,
no.
everybody, that's just it. Everybody talks about things being big. Nobody's big. 2 years ago, nobody gives a shit who I was. I was just some random dude. My username was Stone Pimple Tylists because I didn't want anything to come back to me. So I'm like, I picked some random things. I love, who's my third favorite band? Stone Pimple Tylists or Stone Temple Pilots. And so I'm just like, just flip the words around. Good enough.
Well, Nick August isn't my real name either, because when I first got on, I still had a job with, I was in executive leadership. So back then I didn't even show my face just because I was trying to keep a lower profile. But I was interested in kind of exploring what was going on there. And so the reason I chose Nick August was one of my earliest teaching gigs back in the early 90s. I actually had a student in my class whose name was Nick August. And when I was calling roll the first day, I saw his name and I said, "Is that your real name?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Dude, that would be like the best character name for a detective in a hard-boiled detective novel or something like that." And I never forgot that name, and I just always thought that was great. That was classic. So when I had to get a pseudonym for myself, that's the first thing I went to. I've always liked that name.
That is a good one. I like that. But that's funny because see, I'm going to talk about interior design now. I love when things have a story behind them. Like my house, for every one of the countries I've been to, I would collect a mask. And then I started collecting sand once I started hitting the desert. So my house is full of masks right now from all over the world. And when I was single, it was awesome because people would come over and they'd see like a kabuki mask with a Buddha, with like some Roman one, and it would all just seem mishmashy. Like, what the hell is this? And then anything that people would point at a party, because people are awkward and don't know what to talk about, I could bring up the story like, "Oh yeah, this one I got it in Puerto Rico. That giant crack down the side is because the instant I walked out the door, I slipped on some moss and smashed the thing on my own head." But like everything had a story to it, which is cool. Like that Nick August, it's a story. It's cool. The Ryan Stone is just, well, I want to pick my middle name because I want to segregate it from my real life. And then the Stone was like the first part of my first original username. I'm like, it's kind of cool. And then Rollo Tomasi, same thing. He talks about his. I won't go on there, but it's neat. And I like how it's separate as like a pen name, because a lot of writers have pen names, do they not?
Yeah. Especially people who write really like popular stuff, because writers tend to want to maintain more of a sense of privacy and a barrier between that and their actual life, and they tend to be highly introverted, and so they want to kind of keep a low profile for their personal life.
Makes sense. But here's the segue to that. This actually ties into something I was talking about with Game, for those guys talking about alpha males. I call it like, don't be Don Draper, be John Hamm. Because most guys, everybody, for the longest time, everybody wanted to be Don Draper. He's cool. He gets all the ladies. He makes all the money. Suave. He wears nice suits. But like, they don't realize when the story was written, it's about a narcissist named Dick Whitman who pretended to be Don Draper. And then every time somebody called him out, he'd turn into a bubbling mess on the thing, and snot bubbles and bad stuff would happen. He'd start crying. And I'm like, every guy who tries to be that alpha male essentially does the same thing. But instead of that, why not just be John Hamm? Because if you look at him and you're like, "You're not Don Draper, you're just a fake," and he would look at you like he got 3 fucking heads. He's like, "Yeah, I'm an actor. It's what I'm supposed to do, you dumbass." And I thought, and it's just funny when you think about usernames like Nick August. You're not attached to him. I say that's the worst name ever. It's ridiculous. Like you're not Nick. You're not even an August. You'd look at me like I'm an idiot. Meanwhile, if you go to somebody who's like, I keep using Pinnacle of Man because we did like a half-hour video dunking on him. I'm pretty sure he knows. Pinnacle of Man guy. I'm like, you're not pinnacle of anything. You're not a man. He would probably lose his shit on me.
Well, just using a fake name, you're not investing in anything. It would be one thing if I obsessed over this dude who used to be my student and I legally changed my name and I got credit cards and I went around pretending to actually be that guy. Yeah, that would be weird. But just taking a name as sort of a placeholder, just because you need something there. And it's unique enough to identify you. Just like, people people do with actors do that just to simplify their names so that it's easier to remember. And if I use my real name is so bland and boring that most people wouldn't even remember it anyway. So it's just a tool. It's not an identity.
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, I think that's the key is identity for the most part, and mostly in America. But I guess it happened now that I'm in Toronto. I see it here too, where identity seems to be so important to people. Like just by saying being a liberal is an identity, or
Yeah.
I don't want to say conservative because there's like that fundamentalist ones. I'm fudging American politics, so bear with me. There's like the fundamentalist Christian people who are like, I'm a good Christian is like their identity, even though like they're cheating on their wives and their wife was like a former prostitute or porn star. I think there's a couple preachers that married ex-porn stars.
Yeah.
Which good for them, but I'm just like,
Well, that's kind of the thing that has irritated me about a lot of what I read in sort of the masculine,
I just say the sphere because I don't want to give it any gravitas.
The sphere, yeah, that's a good word. Is that there's again it goes back to there being two kinds of writing I see. It's the stuff that has all these value judgments or these ideas about how you're supposed to live your life, and it's all wrapped up in some kind of idealism or spirituality or some kind of code that was made up by somebody, and you're supposed to do that because the person who is preaching about it does that. And that's the thing that drew me originally, why I appreciated Rollo's work so much, and then yours and some other guys who were more, in my mind, objective about it, because all of the things that I learned about game and dating, I mainly learned through trial and error and a lot of failures and a lot of screw ups on my own. And I found over time, I found what worked. And then when I started reading shit in the manosphere a couple of years ago, I would see stuff that, that's exactly what was going on when I did this, this, and this. Or I would read stuff from other people and I was like, that doesn't even make any sense. How would anybody actually do that in real life? And so one of the reasons why I kind of appreciated, the side of the sphere that I did and that I do was because it, after the fact, sort of confirmed a lot of things, a lot of conclusions I had already come to and experienced for myself. And I think that's important because so much of this stuff, like you said, is tied up in people wanting to live up to some persona or some ideal about what the real alpha is and all that other kind of crap.
Yeah,
and when I was
categorical imperatives.
I just look at it as being strong or weak. That's the way I look at it. And lying to a bunch of chicks just to get them to sleep with you is weak. And there's not even really that much of a challenge there. You can lie and make up stuff, and there are people who will believe it. But to me the chase was more fun and the conquest was more fun if you were actually using game, but using it in a way that was consistent with who you were and not, pretending that you weren't trying to really sleep with them. And you really were just this nice guy who, was sweet and wanted a relationship and everything else. That none of that shit to me ever really works. And it's just weak to sort of go down that road. And the thing that I liked about game that I figured out some things on my own. And then when I started reading, some pickup stuff and some of Rollo's stuff and your stuff and everybody else's stuff, it helped sort of tighten it together and make a little bit more sense to me, was that it provided me a way to...
Well, it polishes the rough edges. That's honestly that's exactly what everybody does. I did it myself. Like most guys will see it. And the reason they even buy in is because like 60 to 80% of it kind of jives with what they know already. They just maybe hear it described in a different way, or, oh yeah, I didn't think to put those things together. And so that extra 30, 40%, it's easier to make a leap on somebody saying this works. Like, well, they were right about all these things. I'll try it out. And then, like you said, a lot of it will always be a guy who they call it mental masturbation. Yeah. He kind of makes some educated leaps, but those tend not to last too long because somebody will go and try it. They're like, this is retarded. It does not work. Forget that. And then you'll see it. So every, like a post on, this is how you like put orange juice in a girl's glass. So that way, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like the plan B thing. if you're worried about getting a girl pregnant, just feed her tons of orange juice. Then you'll have like a lawyer in the chat like, look, here's first off why that's illegal. The worst sexual strategy is being in prison because you don't want what's being offered. Another guy here is like, yeah, I tried that. It still didn't even work. I have a baby. We 18 years in. And then that stuff gets sorted out because guys literally try things, report what happens. And then after a while, the good stuff kind of gets reiterated 5, 6, 7 times to the point where, like, if you're reading something, chances are you're reading something that's already been rewritten 8 times from 7 different perspectives about something that maybe they don't even know. Like, I didn't know what the first guy who wrote about this thing was, but I wrote something that's completely parallel to it. Somebody's read both of them. So it's like, hey, look, these things are all together. And that's what Rollo did.
Yeah.
He just read so many field reports from so many guys. He just put the stuff together that resonated with the largest audience. And that's why everybody talks about it as a life changer. It's not that he's wise or anything. He's just a really good aggregator.
Well, I mean, up about the evolutionary stuff and connect it with, that's the heavy theory and research part. And then, connect it with the pragmatic part, which was pick up and game.
And Mystery did that too, by the way, from way back in the pickup days.
Yeah. I went back and read that, and I read Neil Strauss and everything, after the fact. And the thing that I liked about Rollo's thing, though, was that it gave me this conceptual framework about how things were actually working that corresponded accurately to what I was seeing, and I was just, it's like you're that close to putting it together, but you just don't have enough knowledge about everything to get you there. And Rollo did that research and did that work and actually put it together. And I've seen a lot of people, slam on him saying, well, he didn't really do anything original. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. And me coming from, an academic background of sorts, all research piggybacks on other research. I mean, there's nobody who writes something really in any field anymore that is totally new and groundbreaking. It's people taking this, and this that somebody else did, and then they put something new into it, or they put it together in a new way and then present that. And then you've got another approach here, and which is really what Rollo did. And that's why I always say his work is kind of academic in the best sense of the word, but it's more accessible than most academic writing is. And I think that's accurate, at least based on my experience, because I think a lot of the connections he draws and a lot of the language he uses to get that across, some of the the words and phrases that he uses are really good at explaining what's going on when you've got this intersexual dynamic shit happening. And I thought I think it's really solid. So
yeah, and that's the thing. There's like tons of them. There's between Ian Ironwood, Athol Kay, David Franco. Like, there's tons of guys that people haven't never heard of yet who are doing the exact same thing in parallel, and that's the part that's interesting, because I see a lot of guys when they'll come for a consult, they're like, I'm like, so what have you read so far? What have you done? They'll say, I've watched a couple podcasts with you guys and I read half of the Rational Male. But then they're like, I'm red pilled. And I'm like, you're not. And I can give you guys a syllabus of like 20 guys and what part of their book is applicable to this and from this thing. And it's not even my list. It's other people's lists. I just put them together.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, well, it's interesting and it's bad. And this is where I was going with this, is that it's very easy now to get lost in the weeds and want to engorge yourself on all this stuff because there's tons of it. But it's easier than taking action. And that's where you get the MGTOW guys talking about, well, don't, because Briffault's law this, and Rollo said that, and this guy said this, and I've read 1,500 books. And I'm like, well, what does a girl smell like? And they're like, I don't know.
Well, and that's the test, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
if you have, it's like, I think you and I talked about this on my podcast when you were on, and one of the things that I've told my friends is, some of them who are married and kind of mad at me, I said, until you've spun plates successfully, and it doesn't have to be that big a deal, and it's not like you do it year to year, but until you've spun plates successfully and seen what that's about, and until you've been the other guy, there's a whole depth and dimension to this stuff that you don't know. And I was surprised when I finally did that, what I learned and how it changed my way of looking at at pretty much everything. And I'd already been pretty red pilled at that point, but that kind of took me, another notch down the road, because, when I went out with somebody, and there were two women that I went out with who I figured out over time that I was the other guy. And it took me a while to figure that out, sadly. But I did. And when I saw when I saw what that looked like, I was able to look at, friends' relationships and things that were going on there, or things that had gone on with relationships I'd had in the past. And I was like,
it all just clicked.
Holy crap. That's exactly what was going on. And it was the same thing with spinning plates. I went through it, and I didn't do a lot of it. I just went through about a 2 or 3 month period a couple of years ago where I met 4 really hot younger women, and I clicked with every one of them, and everything went really well. And I went out with, at any given time, I was seeing 2 of them or 3 of them a week for a couple of months. And it really taught me a lot. And one of the things that taught me was, I don't have the energy or interest in trying to manage this many different women, because it was
draining.
I got to the point where I was in bed with one, and I actually had to think and remember what her name was, because I had just seen the day before, and it was weird. I had one come over. All 4 of these women, they came back to my house with me on the first or second date, and I remember on day 2 with the second chick, I was thinking, man, should I wash my sheets, because those sheets smell like the perfume that the chick was wearing yesterday.
And I think that would be like a knock against you, but it wasn't, was it?
That's right. And I just decided, nah, who cares? and so there was weird stuff that would come up like that, and and it was fun, and I'm glad I did it. But ever since then, sometimes I've seen like 2 people at once, but that's about as much as I have energy for, because I'm doing so many other things in my life that just constantly having women come over, or whatever is not.
You have a limited amount of time.
It's not conducive to everything I'm doing. And plus, I'm mid-50s. I've slowed down some. It's like I've got a lot of other things appeal to me more than just conquests. But that's because after my divorce, I made it a point to, before I do anything else, I'm going to go out and see what all of this stuff is like. And that's how I got there. And I'm glad I did, because I had a fairly small, I don't think notch counts are that big a deal, but I do think you have to have enough experience in order to develop a sense of who you are and what you want. And so I probably had, my notch count before marriage was probably 12 or 13. And, I doubled that and that's over the course of like 30 years, right?
Right.
Between dating and then 20 years of marriage. But then, I've doubled that just since I've been divorced the last few years. And I think it's a good thing to do for men, especially when they're younger. And I wish I had waited longer and done more of that when I was younger, because it would have probably changed how I made decisions about who to marry and all that kind of stuff. I'd have just been much more wiser going into it.
Yeah, I got to agree. I'm not going to lie. My 11-year relationship has really plateaued my notch count. It's kind of annoying. But here's my question for you, though. So let's say if somebody had told you before, like during your marriage, before you started plate spinning, all the stuff that you had learned from the experience about like women and relationships or whatever, had they told you it, would you have listened, or did you have to learn that lesson the hard way, or the easy way? I guess hard way. Yeah.
That's a good question. And, the first thing I would say is I have an advantage over a lot of dudes, I think, because one of my best friends in high school was the school stud. He had a notch count through the roof, and he and I worked together at a job for a beverage company. So every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, he and I would go around to all these stores and places in town and stock the product on the shelves and do things, do some promotional things. and he was great. He and I played football together. He was kind of a goofy guy, but he was just great with women, and we would go into stores all over town. And the first time we were there, we would be on a first name basis with all the chicks there. And I was, he was kind of the shark and I was the remora, right? I was along for the ride and getting the scraps, and which was cool. But I watched and I saw how he was, and what made him so effective and how he handled it. And he did that all, exactly like you're supposed to. And so when I was married, and I tried to implement that over the years, and I had minor success with it, but I still had the whole, I need to be a good Christian boy kind of thing operating in the background. And, you don't date two women at once, and you don't do all that kind of crap. And so when I got married and the marriage started going south, I had opportunities to cheat on my wife, and I didn't do it because I had my code and stuff. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's how I was then. And if somebody would have come along to me with this hardcore thing and saying, yeah, it's okay to do this, this, and this, I would have probably seen a lot of that as, well, that's okay if you're not married. But if you're married, then you're just married, and you shouldn't get divorced just because things are bad and you want to go and screw a bunch of different women. And, it was all kind of jumbled up in my head because there's a lot of, you have a 20-year marriage and you have kids and stuff. It can be very difficult to sort through all that and have any kind of clarity about what it is you want.
Oh yeah. There's moral gray areas all around it.
Yeah. And there's the whole, I'm this invested, do I really want to go to all the trouble of, doing this all over again? And so there was a lot to sort through there. And I did kind of have that, yeah, you probably shouldn't be. If you're dating a bunch of different women, you're spinning plates and all that kind of stuff, you're just a player and you're just using people. And my thinking was kind of along those lines. So probably I would have rejected it up until the last couple of years. And it was really, I went through my trauma before we got divorced because we had a fucked up situation that I had to deal with. And I was largely responsible for a lot of it, which was, like we were talking about earlier, one of the hardest things to accept. But when I did, and I started sort of separating myself from my ex-wife while we were still married, by the time the divorce came along, it was rough, and it was sad, but it was also something that I had already accepted was happening. And I had spent, a couple years preparing myself financially in other ways in order to make as good a break as I could.
Dude, there's like field reports over exactly what you just talked about there. Gaining control of the treasury. Another guy, he's in his 60s. He's probably the oldest guy I knew of who finally joined the red pill. He was 65. And even he was crushing it. Frenchie, another guy in his 50s. What was it? Gaining control of the treasury. Dread is essentially what you were doing there. It's like separating yourself emotionally and financially from a bad situation to put yourself in a better one, with the idea that it's not just a branch swing like how chicks would. They don't leave the one guy until they have the other guy. It's guys adopting that, but we'll do it with an olive branch. So if the girl decides to shape up, then you can revisit the issue because we're romantics and whatever. But you aren't really expecting it. You're just assuming it's dead and dying, and you're just trying to get a very clean break, emotionally prepare yourself and whatever. Which, granted, it's a bit of a bait and switch, because anybody who talks about dread, that's exactly what they say. It's like, this is how you survive a dead bedroom and win your wife back. But like you said, you wouldn't have listened if somebody said, yeah, you need to ditch her. Here's how you do it the best way possible. You'd have told them to go fuck themselves. So instead, you kind of have to do this bait, and the first beneficial bait and switch for men is what I argue it is. Yeah, this is how you win your wife back. And then as the guy learns frame, and as he learns boundaries, and as he learns to build his own war chest, he just kind of realizes, maybe I don't want this.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that I saw the writing on the wall, and I had gone through a couple other things, and it was crazy because I was killing it by that point in most areas of my life. The job was great. We had incurred a lot of debt early on in our marriage that I just worked extra jobs and paid off. And there was a lot of beta, kind of beta donkey, in me back then. But I took responsibility for it all, and I paid it all off. And so I was making great money. I had a job that I loved. my sons and I got along fine. But it was like I stepped back and looked, and the only thing that I was failing at was the marriage thing was never working out. And I realized that it was because I was the only one who was really in it. And so I started stepping back from that. And it's funny because the odd thing is that she and I never, we never had really a dead bedroom. We had spaces in our marriage where either because of the kids or because we'd had a really nasty fight, we didn't, touch each other very long. But really right up until about 2 weeks before she moved out, we were still going at it, a couple of times a week, which was weird. Meanwhile, in the background, I'm setting myself up to be single again. And I didn't know it, but she was too. And after she moved out, I found this notebook she had accidentally left behind that had this big checklist of all this stuff she was doing. It had her packing list of when she was going to pack up and move out. And when that happened, I just kind of, it was nice for me because I was able to just kind of laugh at it because,
mutual breakup.
I saw it coming. That's right. It was, so I made her move out. I refused to leave because I said, this is my house, hard for it. She moved out, and our divorce was over in about as quickly as one can be. And she didn't get any of my money. She just left with her bank account, her vehicle, her retirement. I let her take some of the furniture that she wanted, and that was it. And I got the house, and I kept all of my money, all my retirement. The kids were over 18, so there was no custody or child support issues. And she didn't try to go for alimony because she knew how hard I was going to fight her. And she, we both just wanted it to be over at that point. So it worked out about as well as it possibly could have.
But that wasn't an accident, though. That's a conscious choice. Like, you guys probably could have done it when the kids were 16, 17, and then that would have caused some complication.
Well, we did have an incident that happened when the kids were still in middle school, junior high, late elementary school, where it could have happened. And without going into details about it, which I don't want to do, I made it clear that I wasn't just going to roll over. And I think that's something that helped me more than anything else, is that a lot of guys, they get beat up so much through the course of their marriage, and they develop such shitty attitudes about it that they just kind of roll over, and they want it to be as smooth and peaceful as possible.
Oh, dude.
But all they do is they end up, drawing even more fire and brimstone on themselves. And I just made it clear. I said, look, I haven't done anything wrong in this marriage. I haven't beat you. I haven't gambled. I haven't run around. I haven't done anything. And I'm going to use that to my advantage as much as I possibly can. And I'm going to fight you every step of the way for every possible thing you want. And we'll let the courts decide what's fair. And, there's obviously flaws in that thinking, but
it's better than being supplicative.
She didn't call my bluff, and I meant every word I said, and she knew it, because the way I always talk about it is I'm more of a fighter than a lover. So, I'll fight about anything, anytime. And I don't like backing down, and that's sometimes a problem, but she knew I was serious, and that was good, because it made her count the cost of what she really wanted to do. And I think what she decided, even though we went through counseling and all kinds of other useless bullshit that didn't help and really only hurt, I think she just decided, all right, well, I'm just going to ride it out until the kids are older, and then we'll broach this subject again then, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's a solid strategy from that perspective. Here's the funny thing. I don't know if you've read them or not, but you hit on so many married red pill concepts. Operation Scorched Earth, that I would rather burn it all to the ground and give you half the ashes attitude. Learn helplessness. That's the other one you're talking about, that I just want it to be over. Here's a story. Here's a story for you.
Yeah.
When I was working in the military, it was the first 4 years, I was basically like ordinary seaman, able seaman, leading seaman. After the 4th year, I get advanced or promoted to a master seaman, which is your first supervisory rank. One thing I noticed, and there was usually at least one charge every year, which is like the equivalent of like a misdemeanor for the military.
Yeah.
You will be guilty, but mostly the theater is there to get everybody else to fly straight, and the punishments are less severe. So most people just take these like plea deals to summary trials, and they never escalate to a court-martial. Every guy's investigation went the same way. Either the department or the military police did a horrible investigation, screwed up a lot of stuff. Then you would sit the guy in your office and you're like, look, I understand you screwed up. That's fine. Everybody's very disappointed in you. You had a lot of potential. So here's what you do. Just admit everything. We'll do your time. We'll do a summary trial. We'll vouch for you. We'll put you to bat. Do your time. Come back. And you got back to work. Every kid said the exact same thing. I just want it to be over. And that stuck with me after like the 17th time hearing that. And it was like, it was such a weird script. Like even my senior instructor, he actually sat me down and he gave me like a lecture on what to do when a guy's crying in your office. That's a fucked up thing to have to learn to be trained with. And I remember that too. It's like, all right, so you have your Kleenex, you push the box towards him. You don't hand him a Kleenex. You don't ask if he's okay. You just sit there quietly. Don't let him leave the room. You give him enough time as it takes to prepare himself. You don't bring it up. You don't try and sympathize with him. You literally just stay there and let him process this, but do not leave the office. And I was like, holy crap. And then sure enough, I did it and it worked. And I'm still to this day not comfortable watching a man cry in front of me. I just don't like it. And he never explained that part of it was awkward, but whatever. And this helped me because like you said, those learned helplessness guys, the concept, I'm doing like a Rolo rant right now, but the concept is that they had an experiment where they put dogs into cages with the cage door open and they'd electrify the cage. The dog would freak out, run out of the cage. So then that was the control group. With the other set, they would lock the cage. So the dog would scream and cry and try and claw his way out. Didn't work. And then after like 10 or 12 shocks, the dog would just sit there and get shocked and just like take it and whimper. But here was the freaky part. They eventually took half of that group, opened up the cages, and zapped them again, assuming the dogs would just run out now that they could. And they didn't. And so I thought about that. And then during my hardship, which I talked about on Patreon, I hate Batman origin story, so I won't talk about it here. But I came into that position where I had that moment to say, like, I just want this discomfort to be over. And I remembered every single one of these kids that did that and essentially screwed themselves over. And then I turned into you where you just fight it. But it's just hilarious to hear you like on your own parallel path without any input from any of us kind of came to the same conclusions, which is why I love this space. Swapping notes, man.
Yeah.
So damn cool. But I guess we're over time now, so I got to end it there. I'm going to put the links to everything in the description, so start plugging how and where to get a hold of you and all the stuff. I've got your Twitter handle, your website, Punch Riot, and the editing stuff, so feel free. Fluff away.
I mean, that's pretty much it. If you want to read something that comes out a couple times a month that has some interesting fiction and other kinds of writing in it by men, for men, really with a kind of masculine aesthetic and things I don't think you really find elsewhere, check out punchriot.com. There's a sample issue there that you can download and read for free that gives you an idea of what's in the actual magazine. It comes out twice a month right now as a PDF. Eventually, I hope for it to come out weekly. And that's one of the main things that I'm working on right now. And then there's also the editing services, which you can, if you're interested in that or need that, or just want to talk about it and see what it's all about, nickaugust.xyz, and there's a page on there with all the info.
Right. And then on that note, don't forget, Fuck Files is still up. I have my URL shortener. It's ryanstone.com/fuckfiles, FUCCFILES. Links in the chat. There's also the direct link to Amazon there. Feel free to check it out. If you're on the fence whether Nick knows what he's doing with editing, just read it and you'll see for yourself. If you notice there's too many commas and not enough periods, then you'll know not to hire him, but you'll like it, I guarantee. Anyways, enjoy, guys. Half an hour, we got Rule Zero. I can't remember whose channel it's on. Whatever. Check Twitter. We'll find it there. Anyways, thanks, guys, for showing up. Cheers.